Welcome to Clapback, Get the Facts podcast, where we are providing you with the information you need to know about what's politically impacting Black women across the country. In a world filled with mis and disinformation, we provide you with the real. If you're a Black woman, representing Black women, or in the community with Black women, we are here to clap back and give you the facts. Thank you for joining episode 6, Defining Misconceptions on Black Women Candidates. How have misconceptions impacted Black women's electability? We will be sharing the facts and dropping gems. So let's get ready to clap back, get the facts.
Hey y'all, welcome back. I am your host this week, Simone Henderson, and we have already made it to episode 6 of Clapback, Get the Facts. I don't know where the time has gone, but I know we've talked about a lot of great things, and today will be no different. And so today we are discussing defining misconceptions of Black women candidates and how those misconceptions impact their perceived electability. So we'll be sharing the facts and dropping gems. So get ready to clap back and get the facts. I am joined this week by Holly Holiday and Chantel Mullen. Hi, ladies. How are y'all?
Hey, Simone. How are you?
I'm well. So let's jump right in. So we have Black women that, as we've talked about in previous episodes, that are gaining more visibility in the positions that they hold. And with that, we've already defined attacks, and now we're looking at how some of these misconceptions impact Black women as they show up as candidates and their ability to be elected to office and maintain office. So we know that Black women are not only facing gender issues, but also racial issues when running for office. And so we want them to show up in the most relatable way possible, but we know that the standards are not the same for them. So the balancing act of these high stressful roles and their need to come across in a way that appease and appeal to many people can be difficult. So today we'll discuss those misconceptions and ways to fairly evaluate their candidacy. And so we are ready to clap back, get the facts. And with that, we are, even though these Black women have rose to the positions that they have to either run for office or already be in office, they are still facing kind of these 4 buckets of misconceptions. And those are attacks on their appearance, their authenticity, their ability to fundraise, and their ability to attract non-minority voters. And so with that, I want to ask both of you, are these valid areas to evaluate Black women's candidacy?
Hell yeah. I mean, are they valid areas to evaluate? No, of course not. I'm being facetious. But are they things that Black women have to be able to address? Absolutely. And I would add all of that is really an attack on their electability. And it's an unfair, as you put it, tax on how we look at whether or not they are viable candidates or not. And let me tell you, we've seen this happen in so many places. Just most recently, I think about Santana Dewberry in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. You know, this is a woman who has had an effective record as a district attorney, who was raising the money, who had raised the money, who was showing up and, seen as a community leader. She was seen as a bridge builder. And then when some institutional donors and folks from the party decided, based on appearance, based on her ability to attract non-minority voters, all of which was fallacious, they decided to make endorsements and to persuade other institutional endorsers to not support her and choose someone that had less experience and was less competent. And as a result, she was not successful in her race in Durham. And I think that unfortunately, as we see more and more Black women enter into elected into elections, we see these four things in particular, and there probably are others, over and over and over again, impact and put a tax on their ability to win.
Chantel, do you think that Black women come in at an automatic deficit based on these four areas?
I think so. When we start to look at Black women candidates, even when Black women candidates have won, people still doubt them for the next election. They get challengers, but they get criticisms that aren't necessarily germane to all candidates. You will see a lot of extra criticism around Black women's hair, especially if they have a non-traditional hairstyle or a non-European centered hairstyle. You'll get a lot of criticism about their background, about their experiences, even though they may be running against candidates who have lesser experience. And so, Black women, there are a lot of misconceptions. They're not going to pull this kind of person to their campaign. They're not going to get these kind of people to donate to them. People aren't going to support them. It is almost as if we speak it into existence. Instead of saying they can, we start out by saying they can't, and put unnecessary barriers in place for them. And so I just think that, we've got to be mindful of that. We need to think about how we're really defining people, especially Black women, and making sure that we don't speak about them in the negative. And that when we see people starting to speak about them in the negative, that we start to address that, to say, don't put those barriers on those. Don't put those limitations on there. And, you see it from education to work to politics. It's always a fight to get to the top, when sometimes, we have great candidates, and we should start supporting those great candidates instead of, I don't like that shirt she had on. Why she wear her hair like that?
And that brings me, and so I wanted to drop these numbers really quickly, and then Chantel, that moved me to something I've been thinking about, and that I unfortunately have done in the past, or I think is always a system to evaluate. But as of right now, we have approximately 600 Black women running for office all over the country. In all 50 of our states, we have Black women running for office. But the numbers, the higher profile or the more powerful the seat is, the less number of Black women we had even showing up to run for those offices. And I think, does part of it go to, I know, in the past, when we see white men or something that's always been evaluated, that seems like someone I'd want to go get a beer with. And that may be a leading factor on, well, he seems personable. He seems like a good guy to watch the game with and have a beer with. Because Black women, and I may be overreaching, because Black women can't particularly show up like that, because then they would be then graded unfairly as well. Is there an equivalence of what that looks like that draws people in to appeal to, say, I am personable?
Listen, we got to have standards that don't speak to people solely based on identity, if we're being honest with ourselves, right? Because I could say, well, I only want to elect people who I feel comfortable going to get my nails done with. And then the men would be offended and tell me I was being petty. Okay, so I think that the real standard is, do I trust them? Do they seem trustworthy? Are they competent to do the job? Do they bring an experience or perspective that I find valuable? Do they align with my values? I mean, these are the questions that we should make standardized when we are evaluating our elected officials. This idea of I liked her dress, or I liked his pantsuit, or he wore the flag, or he didn't wear the flag lapel pin, or she had the nerve to have on a hat or not have on a hat, or glasses or not glasses, her skirt's too long, her skirt's too short, her skirt is ugly, whatever. All of that is foolishness. And what we really need to be looking at is competence and character, period. We need to be thinking about who they are. Do we trust them? Do they represent our values? We know we won't agree with them. Well, hopefully we know we won't agree with candidates on every single thing, but are they hitting the majority of things? And then I think the other thing is, we do have to recognize that we are a multi-layered individuals and a multi-layered community. Yep. None of us is only one damn thing. Many of us, most of us, in fact, all of us are many things, and we're all living in this community together. I have voted for, and I'm sure most voters, not all, most voters have voted for white men, white women, black women, Latino men and women, queer men and women, and others, and transgenders. Whatever your identity has been, I have been fortunate enough at some point in my lifetime to have the opportunity to cast a ballot for you. And we need to accept that everybody can be on the ballot. I think but we also have to be realistic in understanding that what I want to say here is what we have to recognize is that there are some things that you do need to be able to do to be elected. And so since I'm the only one that lives in my fantasy world of being, thinking that we need to, applying actual competence and character standards and applying standards of, who's the best for the job as opposed to all the other foolishness, and being open to voting for whichever identity fits that purpose. I'm not alone, but it ain't a lot of us. Then I think when we are talking about preparing Black women candidates, which is different than the voters' point of view, but from the candidate point of view, we need to let Black women know, and we need to help prepare Black women to be able to overcome these things. Now, the way to overcome is not conformity. And I'm saying that to all the campaign managers out there in the world who have dealt with a Black woman and told her that she had to look a certain way, she had to act a certain way, she had to avoid certain cultural references. Any campaign manager who has said that to a Black woman candidate, it's time to evolve, because authenticity is what wins the day. The only thing you should be pushing your candidate, any candidate, but particularly a Black woman, to be is how do we continue to project her most authentic self to the voters. And if that is comes from a good place and they have good ideas and good vision, that amplified is the way to overcome the taxes that are unduly being put on your campaign. It is not to conform to the tax. It is not to be more like everybody else. And it certainly is not to ignore it, which is another thing that happens. You got to put your face on.
Well,
oh no, please.
Well, I would just add in, because I think Holly hit upon a really good point, that it's about authenticity and not conformity, but it's also about competency. And I think one of the things that tends to happen, especially in the political world, is we get into personality. And there are some people who have great personalities, but I wouldn't vote for them. I wouldn't let them bring me water across the street if I was on fire, because they're not competent. And so I think people get into the personality and they say, oh, I like this person. Oh, I feel comfortable with this person, or I relate to this person, but that person may not have their best interest at hand. And so we really do need to have some different standards. And when particularly when we start to look at Black women candidates, you see a lot of attacks to undermine them personally. And sometimes those attacks go as far as, well, they're family members. And I'm like, but, at the end of the day, this is really a job.
Yes.
This is a job. And so when do you go to a job and somebody says, but Chantel, your cousin robbed the store? Well, okay.
What they gonna do with
me?
I'm gonna need y'all to not come for my cousin. I'm trying to get my cousin out of jail right now. We just talked about that on the last show. This is why we gotta have a show on the prison industrial complex. I'm working with him.
Well, but we start to allow attacks on people that have nothing to do with that person's competency, that person's ethics, that person's work history. None of that.
That really, I'm so sorry. That really starts to move me into of tying authenticity, and something that comes to mind is sometimes how candidates show up on social media and comments, because it's almost like when you hire a speechwriter, you want them to learn the candidate and speak in the candidate's voice. It becomes very obvious when something is unnatural. But in the process of doing that, there's the misconception that, well, as the authentic them, does that attract people outside of their normal base, bringing us to do Black women attract, or their ability to attract these non-minority voters in mass numbers to win an election, if they are authentically themselves. Whew, that was a lot of
I think voters are savvy enough to vote for people who will represent their interest. The question is, do they ever get to that conversation? Because a lot of times that never, a lot of the political rhetoric or the political conversation actually isn't about the issues that impact the community. There are a lot of wedge issues. Like, for example, people in some states having whole conversations about the border, and they ain't nowhere near the border. And the reason that there are immigrants in their community is because other folks are shipping folks to their community intentionally to cause an issue. Or, for example, in one state, whose governor is having all these conversations about the border, but they also have a worker shortage, and they need immigrants to fill that worker shortage because they don't have enough people moving to their state. They don't have enough people in their state. They don't have enough people within the working age of their state. And so, we get into this political rhetoric where we never can actually get to issues that really impact the community, because people are pushing wedge issues and they're pushing these other issues that have nothing to do, these what I call these inflaming issues, these emotional issues. They want you all in an emotional state, and then you vote based on that emotion, but you never vote on anything that actually helps you
and I think
your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, because maybe that inflammatory issue is something that really touches and concerns you. But in too many cases, what we find is, like you said, Chantel, is that inflammatory issue ain't even your number one concern on a regular basis. And I think as we have as voters have more access to information, thank you Google and Bing and all the other search engines in the world. As we have more access to information, and it is accessible literally from the palm of our hands, that it encourage, I think what we have to encourage voters and continue to encourage voters to do is find the answers to their real questions. I think one of the things that we saw that was a significant change in the Black community in terms of how we voted, that was kind of subtle, but it was real. We stopped being voters who only voted on just people who were talking to us and sort of saying what they were going to do for us, and we're starting to shift. And I really want to thank young voters for this, to being voters who said, "Here's our agenda. How many things on the agenda are you going to meet?" And we began voting for people because they were responsive to the issues that we put out. And we got to continue to move the needle and transform ourselves to be those kinds of voters. Voters who say, I'm not as concerned about, that start with, I'm the priority. My community is the priority. Here are the issues that are top importance to our community, and then have the candidates respond to us and not the other way around. Too much of the system of electing people has been put on the candidates leading. Well, let me be honest. We all know candidates ain't leading nothing. They are talking about the things that somebody told them that voters care about based on some poll, some survey, some information, and then they talk about it. And then because we're only hearing that, we only vote on that. But what we've got to do a better job of is defining for ourselves and our communities, what do we really care about first? And the more we're able to do that, the more proficient we become at saying, this is our agenda, then the better the candidates will be at addressing it. Now, getting back to the misconceptions around Black women, because a lot of Black women candidates are, in fact, a part of their community. And let me just tell you, community is not just defined by race. We had a candidate that we spoke to last cycle who ran for state representative, a Black woman. She ran in a 95% white district. She was authentic to that district. You want to know why? Because she been freaking living there for 20-something years. It didn't have anything to do with the fact that she wasn't white. She knew how to talk to her people. She knew how to talk to the constituents in her district because she was a constituent in her district, because she'd been living there. She'd been raising her family. She understood what the problems were. We have to continue to define people by their districts, and showing them as folks who understand their districts, even when, again, with the appearance, right? They might not look like their districts, but they are authentically engaged in their district. And that meant when she talked to them, she could talk to her constituents in a way that they understood. Mm-hmm. And in this case, her white counterpart did not, because she had been engaged, because she had been doing all the things in community. So she was able to talk about it in a way that her competitor was not, because they were from outside the community just trying to run and get involved. And I think we have to think about that too.
Now, I'm happy that you brought that up. Once again, I have my pen and paper and I was writing.
You and your pen and paper, girl.
I started a fresh new page just for these.
Yes, for the fresh new page.
Okay.
Got they fresh new pages too. So you set the example.
as you were talking, Chantel, I started to write down, and then Holly, you hit it right on the head of when we talk about attracting Black women as candidates, attracting non-minority voters. Then I wrote down that looks like the storytelling and their ability to connect the dots on those wedge issues, or on what the polls and their campaign manager or their policy person comes up and says, this is what the people are interested in, this is their primary issue, of storytelling on how Black women, their candidacy, them as someone that will represent them, connects the dots on those wedge issues to what's really impacting their day-to-day lives, as a way that, and we've seen the way that as Black women storytell, that it transcends communities, as you've already said, beyond race, beyond gender, beyond all of the identities. And so really honing in on those abilities.
Hey,
And
listen, it's like this. You just made me think about something. Was it last year? We recently celebrated 50 years of hip hop.
yes.
And the biggest, and I think everybody recognizes hip hop as a uniquely African American Black art form. Most of the artists are Black. Most of the artists identify as African American. I'm not saying the only, but most, right? And that it comes from a uniquely African American cultural experience, notably starting in the Bronx. However, 50 years later, as somebody reminded me, that
I was like, wait a minute, Holly, are you about to have a fight in our comments on where hip hop started?
No. The point is not where it started. The point is how it has evolved and who is the purchasers and the fans of hip hop. And it's a lot of white people who love hip hop. And they love hip hop because of what you just shared, because of hip hop's authenticity to tell a story. And while I may be a white person from the Midwest and I cannot relate, or may not be able to relate on the surface to a story of a kid out of the Bronx, what I can relate to is how it made me feel and the struggle, right? The struggle is the same. I'm struggling in the Midwest, you're struggling in the Bronx, but we're both struggling. Does it look exactly the same? No, but it has elements in it, values that you're espousing that resonate with me, and I'm interested in that. And that's how it is in politics too. And we gotta, and just like, non-minority folks like African-American music in its many forms, so will they like, and so can they like, and so do they like and vote for Black and especially Black women candidates.
I think that was a great connection, and it brings me into this last area of misconceptions of their ability to fundraise. And so this thought of, is the race viable, and should I put my dollars behind it to elevate this race and to do the things? I know we've mentioned in previous episodes, or in our most previous episode, the race by Miss Angela Also Brooks, and how much her competitors spent to still lose that race. But imagine, if we put those dollars behind Black women candidates, what their campaigns could look like. So how do these misconceptions show up in the thought of Black women as fundraisers?
Well, it starts because the fundraising follows a mindset. And so the mindset has to be first viability. And we tend to question Black women's viability, just like we question their I'm sorry, I just lost the word. We question it just like we question them in the workforce. Do they have the experience? And all of that. And so it's the same mentality, only over in politics. And so if we invest in Black women in the workplace, give them the support, it's the same thing as if we invest in candidates. When we see candidates who are out here, who are Black women who are running, if you just start investing in them and supporting them instead of questioning them, because when you start to go in and question them and you tell them, oh, I'm going to support you, and then you don't, you wasting their time, because they spending time chasing you down, trying to see if you actually going to do what you said you were going to do it or not do it. You know, do what I'm you know, I'm like Yoda, do or not do. But don't give me all of this. Well, I think I might, and I'm gonna put a sign up. I'm gonna come get a sign. I'm gonna give you some money. I'm gonna talk to my network. I'm gonna host a fundraiser for you. You don't have to support a Black woman candidate if that's not who you want to support. But if you've got a good candidate, don't play. Stop playing with them. That's what I would ask folks to do. Because you're wasting their time. They have a limited amount of time to make their case. If they are a good candidate, support them, period. And there are some Black women candidates that we have allowed to wither on the vine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have also, this country has done a complete disservice to the way in which we identify who the contributors are, right? We think of our fundraising and fundraising base as rich white people. But the reality is that every community, and particularly the Black community, we are constant givers. Now, perhaps we don't have millions, but we give all the time. Our giving just looks differently and has not been valued at the same level. I was sitting down with a new friend who is the executive director of the Donors of Color Network. And I haven't had a chance to read this report, but I'm going to read it, and we need to definitely have her on to talk about how minority donors, Black donors were giving and how it was different. Guess what they were, when they asked people, these are people with whose net worth is over $1 million. I think it might have been 5 million. They said, what are you spending your dollars on? You know what they were doing? They were helping put kids through college. They were paying for funerals. They were helping make sure that people had food in their homes. They were helping to make sure that kids in the neighborhood had clothes to wear. Because the reality is, we've come from these same neighborhoods where these people are getting elected. We give all the time. And the issue is we're not seen as givers. And so as a result, as candidates, and I say this to Black women all the time, you need to start with the people who you have direct access with. Everybody in your book can give you something. If they can't give you $1, they can give you time. And you need to not be shy about, and we have adopted this idea that the people who we fundraise from are only rich white people. So we have to stop that. And as a community, we need to define ourselves as the givers that we are. We need to get in the game on contributing. For about 10 years, when I would speak from a stage, I would always work in write a check. In fact, there's a lot of people who only know me because I would be the only one on the stage saying, write a check, support somebody, put your money where your mouth is. And I need to go back to that because I need to continue to amplify the fact that we too can be donors. That being said, my advice for Black women candidates, though, is you can get there, but it might take you longer. it might take you longer because the communities, not just Black people, but the communities that you are associated with, depending on who you are, your life experience, they may need to give in smaller amounts, which means it's going to take you a little bit longer to get to that same goal. But give yourself time to get to where you need to go. It may take you longer. You may have to plan differently. Your fundraising plan may not look like house parties because everybody living in an apartment ain't got no room for no party. And that means it's going to look a little different. Maybe it looks more like having something virtual. Maybe, and it shouldn't just be one thing, right? Maybe it looks like sending out more emails, doing more direct mail giving. It could look like your mix might be different. The people who you go to might be different, but those people, as we learned through the Obama campaign, collectively can raise millions and make you as competitive as anyone else. And then the other thing is, and this is an Angela also Brooks understanding, money alone ain't gonna get you elected.
That part. I was just about to say that.
You gotta have something else. You have to be in relationship with your community. Modern politics requires a relationship. We have moved beyond the transactional politics in most cases. People want to feel like they can trust you, and they know that, and they feel like that when they feel like they know you, because they've seen you in their neighborhoods, because you're coming to and participating in the struggle with them to solve problems. We don't need you to be the savior with all the answers. We need you to be part of a fight that we're already in, that you're contributing to.
And I'll just piggyback on what Holly is saying, because money is important in an election,
Yes.
but money is not the only currency. And I think we need to, when we start to talk about our Black women candidates, we need to make sure that they understand that relationships are as big a currency as money. Because I may not have $1,000 to give you, but I may have access to 1,000 people who I can influence to move in your direction, or at least start to hear your message. And so one of the things that I talk to candidates about when I'm actually talking to candidates, because every once in a while I work on some campaigns, and I talk about your relationships. Because if I come to your campaign and you show me, you pull out the 30 people that you talk to the most and that are your friends, if those 30 folks won't give you $5, your campaign already has a problem. Because the people
fundraising,
right, because the people around you aren't supporting you. And so you need to understand why. And so relationships are a huge currency, because sometimes fundraising follows relationships, not the other way around.
Yes.
Because if you can just get 20 people who absolutely love you and die hard, those 20 people will find you some money.
Exactly.
They will raise you some money, because when people see other people riding that hard for you and believing in you, and because they will sell your message harder than you will sell your message. And so, we have to understand fundraising, as we have seen, because we've had 2 Black women run against self-funding multimillionaires, and those multimillionaires have lost because they didn't have relationship. They just had money.
And I think that is a great place. I come back to when you said relationships can equal currency. And so I think that is a great note to wrap this episode on. I want to thank you, Holly, and you, Chantel, for joining me and reminding people exactly where we stand, of knowing that these misconceptions are out there. They are very real, and they are active barriers for Black women running for office, and have been used as excuses to ignore or not elevate Black women running for certain positions. And so recapping, those misconceptions are centered in appearance, authenticity, their ability to raise, and their ability to attract non-minority voters. And wanting to say that, as we've stated throughout this episode, appearance does not equal competency. Their authenticity translates to voters, and that's what gets voters on board, of finding and elevating your candidate's voice and being authentic to themselves. Their ability to raise funds from the candidate side, diversify your donor portfolio, and understand you should start with the people closest to you. As Chantel said, relationships are currency, and maximize those relationships to get your campaign off the ground, and give yourself the leeway to build the numbers that you need, knowing we may not have access to the $1 million donors. And finally, the ability to attract non-minority voters is the same as storytelling, as we've done across a number of different industries over time. And so we show up, we tell, and we connect the dots. And that is how Black women candidates are overcoming these misconceptions, can overcome these misconceptions, and we will reject these misconceptions when we hear them, because they are more than qualified for what they're doing, and we're going to help them get them over the line. So with that, our call to action is, as you said, Holly, we're going to stop caring about what they got on. We're not worried about their skirts. We're going to call it out, and we're going to look into their competency, and that's what we're going to trust in, and not their hairstyle. We will continue to push forward the facts about their qualifications, and then leaving off on our last note, and I quote, write a check. And so, so I want to thank you all for joining us for episode 6 of Clapback, Get the Facts. We look forward to having you back next week.
Thank you for joining us here on Clapback Get the Facts podcast. We hope that you're leaving feeling more informed and ready to provide others with the facts. We would love to hear your biggest takeaways from this episode, so post the show on your Instagram story and tag us at Sisters Lead. Also, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. And while you're at it, please leave a review so others can get some sense of the facts that we're providing. Finally, if you would like to learn more about local resources and other projects we're working on, go to sistersleadsistersvote.org.